Good morning, everyone. Today's learning is dedicated in memory of Leah Bas Bible, Binyamin Akiva ben Shlomo, Rav Yaakov Zvi ben David Aryeh Tzipora Fegel Bas Ruben Baruch Shem Paula Kazmeh Shalom ben Eli Li ben Bas Bible from Rosh Hashanah Bas Yaakov Shmuel Kela Bela Bas Henach Yirmiyahu Chiyov ben Moshe Eliezer Malka Bas Binyamin Shlomo Chiyov ben Yeshua Levi Avram Mordechai ben Moshe Katna, as well as the York sites for today. Hinda Bas Moshe Gluckstein, Rivka Bas Aziz Ashvanor, and Esther Bas Yaakov Marks, and wish all their families long life. Good morning, everyone. So I want to do a couple of Mishnahs today with you. One which the concept will be familiar, one which will be perhaps a rather strange, and a story as well to boot. So the first Mishnah goes as follows. So we're still talking about Hillel. Hillel once saw a skull floating on the water, and he said, Amallah, he said, Al da teft at fuch, which means that you drowned others, and now they drowned you. Those who drowned will be drowned, right? Because you drowned others, then they drowned you, and those who drowned you will be drowned eventually. Now, what it doesn't mean, as the commentators are at pains to point out, is that every time we see that somebody that's been murdered, or somebody, or a skull, or a remains, it means that that person, deserved to die, but deserved to be murdered. That's not what it means. What it does mean, say the commentators, is that there is always a meaning to everything that happens to us in life. And therefore, whatever, we don't necessarily understand it in this world, but it means that there is, ein din v'lo dayan. There is no judgment without a judge, and therefore we should recognize whatever happens to us in life must have meaning and significance. All right, that's point number one. The second Mishnah, it's longer Mishnah, but it's all one concept. I'll read it in English because otherwise we'll run out of time. He used to say as follows, and this is again Hillel, and of course these two Mishnahs really go hand in hand. These are the last two Mishnahs of Hillel, and he is speaking in terms of our outlook, in terms of our philosophy, in terms of this world and the next world, and ensuring that when we are in this world, we recognize everything has meaning, everything has significance, how we cannot just close our eyes and live a hedonistic life and pretend that we're going to be here forever. That's not the way it works, as you'll see in the next Mishnah. He used to say, the more flesh, the more worms, the more possessions, the more worry, right? The more wives, the more witchcraft, the more maidservants, the more lewdness, the more manservants, the more thievery. However, the more Torah, the more life, the more study, the more wisdom, the more counsel, the more understanding, the more charity, the more peace. One who has gained a good reputation has gained it from his own benefit. One who has gained himself Torah knowledge has gained himself the life in the world to come. So there's a lot obviously packed into this Mishnah, and witchcraft is not to be taken literally. The point being is that it's referring to polygamy, which is pretty much banned in Judaism because of jealousy. But let's try and understand the overarching theme of this Mishnah, which is what I want us to take away. And that is, how do we see the world that we live, right? How do we relate to it? Are we meant to live a life of abstinence, where we remove ourselves from worldly pleasures, where we live in monasteries as monks and priests? Or are we meant to live in this world, enjoy this world? Or do we live in this world, but it's not really quite, the ideal? How do we see it? And the answer is that the Almighty put, in the same way he put Adam and Eve into this world, he put us into this world. And the idea is that we are meant to take everything that we have in this world and make a bracha on it, elevate it, infuse it with sanctity. As we mentioned before, and we've written in our essays, the idea is to cause a fusion, a meeting of the world on high and this world. The same way that at the moment of divine revelation, there was a meeting of heaven and earth, so it is throughout our lives. We are able to bring a bit of God into this world and therefore suffuse it with sanctity. How do you do that? The idea is that everything that we have in this world can and should be used for the correct purpose that it was intended. And if we do so, then we are able to elevate it, and then there is a purpose for us to having it. So there is no such thing as wealth is something abhorrent in Judaism, and therefore we have to shun, material possessions. Quite the opposite. We embrace it, but it comes with it a responsibility to be used in a responsible way. There's an amazing story that you may have heard relating to Edward Reichmann. Edward Reichmann was a very wealthy man, as the name Reichmann suggests. He was a billionaire and a great philanthropist, and he lived in Israel, and he died fairly recently. And the story came to light after his death that he had left 2 wills to his children. One will was to be opened immediately upon his death, and the other one was to be opened 30 days later. So on his dying, the children opened up the first envelope to find the request of their father relating to his burial. And he said as follows: "Dear children, I would like to please be buried in my favorite pair of socks." That was the first of the wills that he made. So they went to the rabbi, and of course the rabbis always have to deal with difficult questions. And they said to the rabbi, he was a great philanthropist, a great man. We know that usually it's an unusual request. People don't usually get buried in their socks, only in shrouds and the talus. But this was the will, and I'm sure you can find a way to have a bit of discretion and allow Edward Reichmann to be buried in his socks. And the Chevra Kadisha, they were having none of it. They said it's one rule for everyone: you leave this world the way you come into it. You come into it with nothing, you leave it with nothing. And it created tremendous upset for the family at the time. They weren't able to fulfill the wishes and the will of their father. 30 days later, as per their father's wish, Edward Reichmann's children opened the second envelope. And when they opened that second envelope, he said, "By now, my dear children, I would have been buried. It's the Shloshim, it's the 30 days, and you will not have buried me with my socks." And that is because, he said, a person can never take with them the wealth of this world. And therefore, we are only worth what we give, the way we use our wealth in this world. And it is a precious lesson for us that one of the wealthiest men in the world was not able to even take a pair of socks with him. And therefore, that is what this mission is saying. It's saying, think about where we come from and think about where we are going to go. We start off as a putrid drop, and we end up being buried in the ground, and eventually being no more than being connected back to our soil, to our essence. And therefore, Hillel says in this Mishnah, that is the approach that we have to have with life. That all that we have is a means to an end, not an end in itself. The cars, the houses, the clothes. And I think that particularly during lockdown and COVID, when shopping, which had become a hobby, somewhat of an obsession for so many people, a thing to do, right? As part of it was like a ritual to go shopping, to go to Brent Cross, to go out, right? As something that we have adjusted and recalibrated ourselves to living without. We still can have things, but it doesn't have to be this whole aura around the shopping and the experience. What do they call it? Shopper therapy or retail therapy. So therefore, he goes on to say, and now the second part of the Mishnah makes absolute sense. The more Torah, the more life, the more study, the more wisdom. It's when we are able to delve into the wisdom of our sages, as clearly Edward Reichmann had, that we are able to ensure that we have the correct perspective when it comes to life and it comes to things in life. We have to ensure that we put the right emphasis on the value of things rather than the price of things. And in that way, please God, will ensure that we live up to this Mishnah and live a life of meaning, fulfillment, and a life when we will be able to look back and say, I invested my time, and my resources in the right way. We'll continue now with that after that fascinating idea from Hillel, and we move on to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai of Yavne fame tomorrow. Okay, you can look him up. Fascinating character of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who really was one of the heroes and saviors of the Jewish people at the time of the destruction of the temple. And we carry on with Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He causes me to lie down in green pastures. He restores my soul. He leads me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. Even as I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You set a table before me in the presence of my adversaries. You anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord for the length of days. Memorial prayer. Don Elamim Zacho Esnish Mos Ben Yamanaki Ben Shlomo Le Bas Bible Rav Yaakov Ben David Aryeh to Parapegel Bas Ruben Barak Olam Kazmir Shalom Ben Eleli Ben Bas Bible from Sheshan Bas Yaakov Shmo Kela Ben Bas Enach Yirmiyahu Ben Moshe Eliezer Shramaka Bas Ben Yamin Shlomo Yechia Ben Yeshua Levi Avram Mordechai Ben Moshe Katna. And the yacht sites for today in the Bas Moshe Gluckstein, Rivka Bas Aziz Ashpano, Esther Bas Yaakov Mark Shalchu Lielamam Bergan Eden Teimnu Chasam Lachin Balarachamim Yasi Rain Vesisakana Papiolamim Vitzos Chasnish Masamadana Nachlasam Vianuchu Bishlomish Kavam Venamar. Amen. Long life wishes to all. We conclude with a Refuah Shlema prayer. Mi Sheberach Avaseinu Avram Yisrael Yaakov Moshe Aaron David Shlomo Yivarach Rapes Achaylim Bavo Shana Mispalim Bavo Ram Biskuzakodesh Baruch Yimalei Rachim Aleichem Lachem Alefosam Yishlach Lem Fush and Mishmaim Melochol Vim Besoch Shachol Yisrael Refuah Son Nefesh Fusok of Hashabak Zmaka Riven Amar. Amen. Have a great day, everyone. Keep safe, keep well. Jewish Impact, I believe, has been moved till tomorrow to accommodate somebody very, very special. His name is Eli Beer, who himself almost died during COVID and is the director of Hatzalah, so worldwide Hatzalah. It's been a real effort to get him because he was on an emergency operation overseas, flying someone back, and therefore we are truly honored that we'll be able to interview him tomorrow, not tonight. Take care.